Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a DADCAW, 7th of September 2020, 9:39 p.m. Those are our date and time for you. What's been going on with me? Well, I just set down the last recording of the Batman game, Arkham Knight, and at some point I'm going to be penning a review for that. Try to organize my thoughts on that relatively soon, but other than that, I've been obviously working on Deliverance, this single-player campaign for Brood War 161. Protoss-centered, of course, but alt history, so it's got its own little thingama-what's-its going on for it. Very unique characteristic among campaigns, since it's actually trying to tell its own story, despite the limitations of the engine and the setting. So, lately, the campaign has been getting significant updates to its story, insofar as I'm getting a better understanding of what plot elements and characters and threads are absolutely paramount to the project's success and to the real identity of the project as a whole, and what ones can be cut or, shall we say, moved around and circumvented, just so that I can get a read on the presentation aspects of the campaign. And another thing that has been happening is obviously the development of these first drafts of all of these projects, all of these maps, as well as iterative updates to the jungle tile set to better support this sort of thing. So there's been a lot of development, but I haven't actually been able to really experience the end result of that development just yet, as a result of the fact that I've been just doing these drafts. I've just been quickly putting together these maps, and they look fun to play on, and they look engaging and interesting and nuanced. And they look like, well, they look a little barren until the doodads get in there, but they look compelling. It's just that I can't verify that through gameplay until they're in a position where I can play on them, obviously. And while technically I could slap some melee AI in there, that probably would give me some sort of mechanism for judging how good the maps actually are, I can't be certain that the content of the tests or the results of those tests would actually be super compelling or even super useful. And in a time where I'm actually constrained by the amount of time that I have, given that this map is, or this campaign is for a contest, it's for map crap, I do have to keep that in mind. And as a result, I've just been sort of charging forward to try to draft all 7 maps before really digging into any specific one, which leaves them in very curious states, sometimes visually, with some extended tiles that are planned but not actually implemented, because to actually implement them and make them would take time away from developing the draft of the next map, and obviously that would also result in, like, if I decided to shape the layout slightly differently, that would also result in a bunch of changes there, where it's like, if these are not general purpose tiles, I can't justify making them in the first place until I know that the layout itself is actually final. There's many considerations and many reasons why those final stages, or I don't even know if you would really call them final stages of polish, but some stage of polish has not actually been implemented to many of the maps, just on the basis of the fact that, you know, we're trying to get the drafts themselves taken care of before we worry too much about anything else. And I think that this approach has actually been really, really successful for a variety of reasons. But one of them is the fact that I'm already pretty good at what I do. I'm pretty good at making maps in Brood War. I think that you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who would argue successfully against that point. I mean, I've just been doing it for so long. The odds are stacked in my favor when it comes to actually trying to put something like that together. So, suffice it to say, it's no wonder why I'm good. And not that I couldn't get better, but at this point, I've progressed my skills to the point where I can make pretty good maps, even just in the draft phase. So, given the fact that I've more or less, I won't say necessarily mastered the craft of RTS map making, but at least within Brood War, I know the process to do so efficiently, and I also know what I'm doing on a more fundamental, like, broad scope, skill-based thing about level design. I am able to actually focus on just generating content, not necessarily worrying about improving my skills per se, though I'm sure that will happen naturally as a result of doing all of these exercises. But I also end up getting into a position where we are dealing with, you know, essentially I'm just making content, right? Producing a lot of maps. And it's actually something that I think I'll try in the future for other things as well. of course, it'll be stuff like programming or whatever, but I think similar to how I did the original draft of Hydra back in the remastered days, working with the, trying to essentially just make a campaign without too many roadblocks. I wasn't going to bother coming up with my own story. I was just going to remake the original Rebel Yell campaign and go from there. And like one of the reasons why that ended up being successful was not because I generated a high quality product at the end of the day, but because I was able to learn a lot about making content and learn, for another reason why I was able to learn that I still had a lot to learn. Because when I released in Consummate, I foolishly thought that I was actually, maybe I correctly asserted that I was the best. But just because I'm the best doesn't mean I'm good. And in Consummate proved that just because you make the best campaign doesn't mean that that best campaign is good. So I had a lot to learn, and Hydra taught me that I wasn't even close to the high end. And that was a good assumption to get checked at the door when I started working on Hydra, and something that has sort of innervated me, made me more excited and more passionate to continue working and continue improving and try to really reach the final level, or whatever the highest level that I can reach is, the final level for me as far as content generation goes. And that's where Deliverance comes into play, because this drafting process allows me to basically sort of, instead of like trying to learn more skills or hone more skills or like, again, perfect the craft as it were, I'm just making content. I'm just using my skills, putting them to use, and to doing so in the name of this particular project, doing so in the name of making a lot of content. And I hope that at the end of the day, we'll have 7 really good maps, despite the small amount of time that we've had to generate them. But at the very least, we'll certainly have 7 functional maps, because 3 maps are already functional at the time of this recording. And, it only took me a couple of days per map to make them functional. And then we can worry about polishing them up and deploying the AI in greater scales. Even if for some God-forsaken reason, at the end of this all, the scripts are, like the actual dialogue scripts are a little wonky. The voice acting is maybe trial run in a few cases and could have used some redrafts. And the AI is barely updated melee AI. Like, I don't think any of these things will happen. But even if that does happen, it'll still be in maps that have functional and complex and compelling layouts, where I know that some of my best work is actually embedded within this project. And that's going to be satisfying enough for me. I'm sure I'll continue tweaking the project in such a state, because I wouldn't want to leave it there. But by the end of this contest, at the very least, we'll have something really strong to present for ourselves. And, will that be worth potentially having a shitty first look for anybody who plays it when it's first released? I don't know if it'll be worth that per se, but at the very least, it'll be a nice crystallization of what I was able to do given the time and the resources. And I think that's been an interesting learning experience. Deliverance, with regards to working on it in the sort of surroundings of, Full Toilet, this map crap event, has helped me to realize a lot of things. And one of those things is actually related more directly to the idea of being a project lead. And that's something that's going to be super important in the coming weeks, months, years, when we're working on our engine and then later on our game within that engine. I'm going to have to be able to take the charge, and not in the sense that I just have to boss everybody around and do nothing, but I have to lead by example. One of the things that I've been thinking about lately, as a result of having conversations with Veek and seeing his own dedication and his own level of discipline, given the fact that he's been able to bring about some of the most large-scale changes. Well, he's helped with the largest scale changes to Hydra entirely in the past couple of 2 months or so, since, I guess, the past month, actually, since that's when we started this whole collaboration more closely. That's when he did the most of the work that he's done on Hydra and as well as on Deliverance. So ultimately, I see him as being heavily responsible, we'll say, in many ways, for the progress that we've been able to make when it comes to Deliverance, and as well as when it comes to Hydra. And the fact that I think, he's been inspired and motivated to get work done, I don't want to take all the credit or even most of the credit for that, but in the past, my partnerships, my collaborations with other individuals has always ended poorly. You think back to, some of you were around when I was still working with Necron on the old version of Hydra. And before that, I was working with an individual known as Church on a series of campaigns, none of my own ideas actually got released. I helped release a few of that individual's ideas, but or that individual's campaigns. But I'd never released anything until I started working solo with Inconsummate. And even before then, I really had no luck actually releasing anything solo or otherwise. And I think the reason why, one of the reasons why those collaborations didn't end up working out, some of it may have been occasional, shall we say, personality conflicts, and some of it may have been something else entirely, but I think I wasn't as dedicated as I am now. And that is a big deal, because when you see the person that you're collaborating with, or that you're ostensibly supposed to be collaborating with, and you see them working day in and day out the way that I have, you can't help but feel that you should also pick up part of the burden that you've chosen that you've agreed to carry, pick up part of the work, and start to do that work. I think that's more convincing an argument, or more convincing, like a more powerful a tool for motivation than some people might think on its surface. I know for sure that I would definitely feel responsible. I feel some kind of, maybe, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but some sort of responsibility if I see somebody else like picking up, like doing a lot of work, and I know that I'm not doing as much as I could be. And so I can only imagine that, Veek probably has something similar there, besides the fact that he's also shown himself to be disciplined in his own way as well. Although I'm not sure if he'll agree with that estimation, but I think that when it comes to the idea of discipline and of motivation, when it comes to collaborative projects, if you don't have somebody picking up the mantle as leader, I think it does become a lot harder to maintain motivation as a group. And that's something that I've found to be quite disruptive. So even though I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to programming, and even though there's a lot to learn in that respect, I think that when it comes time to make the engine, and later on when it comes time to work on the game, even if I'm not necessarily project lead as far as like the know-it-all behind everything and like the lead designer or developer, I can still maintain leadership in the sense of leader of men, in the sense of like, always working on it, always keeping up the fight, always serving as sort of like a mascot maybe, or some sort of leadership figure in that sense, where I'm providing like a reminder, a very frequent reminder that we are always able to do more work, that it's not like lost or anything. It's not like we don't have any motivation, because if I have the motivation to work every single day, as I have for the last 310 days as of the time of recording, then surely we can get something done, even if it's small. And eventually those small incremental improvements and steps will result in a completed product. Perhaps the quality will vary, but at the very least we'll have something complete that we can then tweak and update and make better. And that's always really the goal that underlines this whole thing. So there's been a lot of lessons from Deliverance, and the project isn't even really that long into its development. We haven't even lasted longer than, like, I think we're a month and a week or something like that into its development. And despite that fact, I've been able to learn a lot about, like I just said there, about musing on being a project lead and actually leading other developers, and mostly by example, admittedly, because maybe I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to the programming side of things, when it comes time to work on the engine. But leading nonetheless, providing some sort of stable, consistent element within the development team is going to be a big deal. And I think that I can take up that mantle. I think that I can bear that responsibility. I think I've shown that with the last 310 days, and I feel pretty confident about that. So, like, at least somebody on the development team will be working on this every single day, right? And since the other people know that, they are more likely to work on it every single day, I think. Anyway, it's a postulation. It's an assumption. But I think it'll bear out when we end up getting into that point, just based on, from what I'm seeing. It's not like a cure-all. It's not a panacea. It's not going to fix everything, but it certainly will go a long way, I think. And the other lessons have been related to actual content development. I mean, once I master my skills by virtue of engaging in projects that maybe I'm engaging in projects more for the sake of mastering my skills than I am for the sake of the project itself, whereas Deliverance is very much a concept that I'm in some ways married to, I guess. Like, I'm not blind to its faults, but I'm also like very much invested in seeing it done. And so that's where the difference is. It's like, I'm not really here to prove a point about my skills or to improve my skill level. Not strictly speaking, that's not like the primary reason I'm doing it. That is an underlying reason, but not a primary reason. And like the primary reason is more about the project itself. Whereas with Hydra, the primary reason was I want to get better at making content. And so when you have that duality there, you realize now that I'm good enough at making content that I can attempt a project that I want to see done on a conceptual basis, for the project's sake, as opposed to for my skills' sake. Now I can actually do that, and it can feel all the better, I think. It will feel all the better, generally speaking. So, yeah, a lot of lessons right then and there. So, development has been good. Things have been good. I know that's not the case for all people in the world, but I hope you are good as well. And we'll be back with another DADCAW some point later this week or next. And stay tuned for more Deliverance mod streams, more Batman content, just the review itself, of course. And otherwise, more frauds. Bye.